It's an honor to come here and share a little bit with you about what Gloucester Township Police is doing. So in about 10 minutes, I'm going to give you a quick overview of kind of the reform that we've done in Gloucester Township relating to youth. And we describe it as a program called VISION. As you can see, it's an acronym. Now it's been up there probably the whole time I've been here. But it really is all of our partners in our community coming together to change how we treat youth. And we started that back in about 2011. A little bit of background about where I come from in Gloucester Township. We're southern New Jersey. We're about 15 minutes south of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, about 45 minutes north of Atlantic City. Our community is 24 square miles, about 65 to 70,000 people, and you see our breakdown of personnel. Just a little relevance and a little background about how we're able to do what we do with the size community that we have. In New Jersey, that's a fairly large community. In some parts of the country, that's very small. But just I thought that was important for you to understand where we come from. You know, when you look at this slide, these are my children, and a little bit of history. You heard 28 years in law enforcement, and 15, 20 years ago, I was in the juvenile unit. I was a detective in the juvenile unit. I taught in the schools, various programs. We have had a number of them, getting to know an officer, the DARE program, and I would be there with teachers that were in a fourth or fifth grade classroom, and the teachers would say, "That kid's going to be nothing but trouble when they're older. That family is a mess, and you're going to see that kid one day." And then 15 years later, I'm a sergeant or lieutenant, and I'm working the street, and officers bring people under arrest, and who do they bring in? That kid that they said in fourth or fifth grade that was going to be nothing but trouble and arrested, and they were absolutely right. And back then, 20 years ago, what did we do about that? We didn't do anything as a police department. So fast forward that to my early 30s when I had my first child. And then I started to, because all that time I worked in schools and all those time I was answering calls for service. As a police officer, I didn't have children at home. And I'll tell you, when you have them at home and you come home and you see them, boy, it really changes your perspective when you start to deal with them. And that kind of gave me the momentum to say, hey, we have to make some change. And in Chief of Police in 2010, I really made it one of my missions to come forward and make change about how we deal with juveniles and youth in our community, and really justice reform in general. Today we're focusing on youth. And for so many police departments, arrest is the only option. And it continues to be that way today for many police departments across the country. But as you'll see, there are other options. So when we look at that young child, let's say she's about 8 years old, and she wants to be a teacher, a lawyer, congressional staffer, whatever she may want to be as she wants to grow up. And she has dreams, but she's probably not dreaming at 8 years old that she wants to be sexually exploited, or that she's going to be addicted to heroin, or that she's going to be a burglar fueled by drugs, or that she's going to be the victim of domestic violence. Somewhere along in her life, from the time she was 8 to maybe 15, 16 years old, things happened to her and those dreams disappeared. And the first contact she probably likely had in terms of kind of a negative action that she did was law enforcement. And I will tell you, the traditional law enforcement response are handcuffs, that they arrest them and they take them and they put them into the juvenile justice system. And you'll hear from, I'm sure, some of the other experts today, that is not always the best scenario, because we're kind of missing the underlying factors. So we call that a single gear response. If you're a police department operating with just handcuffs, you're in single gear. That's what you're doing. And that's what we want to break free from. So we hear a lot of talk of community policing, and we run a very heavy community policing department. But I will say that community policing, yes, if you have an officer on a bike or you have officers that walk a footbeat, that's community policing. But you really need to look at the definition of community policing and some key words that are in there. And it's partnerships and problem-solving techniques. And then to address social disorder. Because it is the social disorder, and some mental illness as well, but it's the social disorder that is feeding the crime and the issues that are facing young people, whether it be runaway, suicide, drug addiction, violence. It's all tracing back. And for police agencies, if they really want to help, they need to address it through partnerships and programs to resolve those kinds of issues in that social disorder. And that's what we've done in Gloucester Township. One of the first programs that we launched was called MARS, and it's Missing at-Risk Response Strategies. And it's very large. We could do an hour presentation on that, which we will not. But it started with an intern doing research about our missing person cases, 3 years worth. And what we found was that, not surprisingly, because it does match with the data that's across the country, that domestic violence was the #1 call for service in the home of those kids that run away. And followed also by threat of suicide by the child is one of the most common issues reported. So we needed to kind of tailor a program around that. So to kind of give you an idea what happens with a missing child, I'll kind of walk you through in a minute of what happens when a child goes missing. And we're not talking about the 8-year-old that maybe been abducted. We're talking about runaway youth for today's purposes. Mars addresses those as well, but today we're talking about runaway and throwaway youth, parents that just don't care about whether their children come home or not. So let's take a typical scenario, 15-year-old girl. And the 15-year-old, this is kind of a story, not facts-based. I have some fact-based in the next slide. But so officer comes, sits across from the mom, and the mom says, am I talking too loud? Oh, 5 minutes. Okay, good. I'll be good. Thanks. Sorry, I thought I was talking too loud. And the mom comes in and says that she ran away. And she tried to commit suicide last month, and I don't know what to do with her, and that she uses pills and she gets drugs. Her boyfriend and her get high, and she has ADHD, but she doesn't take her medicine, and she tries to take it in other places. And you should send her to juvie, send her to detention for a few days, because that'll teach her a lesson, and that'll really straighten her out. That'll fix her. But mom doesn't tell you that last night, when she decided to run away, her daughter, she was in the bedroom and listened to her mom get beaten by her boyfriend. And she's endured that for 2 years. And she finally had enough, and she decided to walk out of the house and run away and go to a friend's house. And mom also doesn't tell you that her boyfriend's brother, meaning mom's boyfriend's brother, may have sexually assaulted her, but we don't really believe her because she makes up stories and she likes to get attention. It's Jerry Sandusky from the Penn State sex scandal, if you don't recognize the photograph. Mom doesn't talk about that to the police. And mom doesn't say that she has emotional issues that she doesn't address. And mom doesn't say that she tried to commit suicide 2 years ago. And mom doesn't say that she uses pills as well. She doesn't tell you any of that at the police officer taking the call. And then when the child comes home and we interview her and we ask what happened, she's been silenced and conditioned. And she says, I ran away because my mom took my cell phone away. And what's the typical police officer telling her? Don't run away again, or I'm going to bring you back to the same hell that you just ran away from. And the whole cycle continues over and over again. And that's what's going on in many communities. What we did in 2010 when we changed, this is an actual sentence from a missing person's return. So the officer would sit across from the child and say what happened. And he says, I'm fine, I'm in good health. And that's the way we treated them almost my entire career up until 2010. So we walked out that door and said she was in good health. But look at the history of Cynthia that was going on before she ran away. And we still walked out of that door and we didn't pay attention to any single bit of that. And we did that same exact thing. Don't leave the house. Stay here. And we didn't address it at all. So now we do a 3-page questionnaire, and the child's interviewed by the responding officer, even if it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and ask a whole series of questions. Questions such as, is there a person or adult that you trust at the school? Or has anyone physically hurt each other? Have you seen your parents? And that was written, these are real answers. That was a 15-year-old writing that about when she was 6. So what do we do with that information? We take that information and we feed it into a weekly meeting we call the Juvenile Unit Huddle, or the JU Huddle. And that brings everyone, every partner that we have in our department, including a licensed social worker, all together to talk about every contact with every youth every officer's had, whether it's runaway, truancy, some kind of offense, and then we make an action plan, and an action plan that looks like that. So Robert Smith changed the name, true story, 17 years old, reported missing 2 times, and he's now living with his grandparents because his father was arrested for sexual assault on his sister. So what we do is Detective Grozlonic goes out to the school counselors, kind of alerts them, because they're our partners in our vision program. And also the trusted teacher that Robert listed on his form, Mr. Campbell, we say, hey, you might want to just ask how Robert's doing. He doesn't get told the story. He just says to Robert, hey, Robert, how's everything going at home? And we'll never know the value of the child's trusted teacher having that information and what that conversation between the two will spark. So what we've seen the results, we've seen our missing person incidents drop by 30%, comparing 2009 to 2013. We can't say for sure it's our program, but it certainly seems to have a connection. You know, when we talk about the difference in racial disparity is really something important. It needs to be, I think, really closely looked at. So in 2014, 51% of our missing juveniles were African American, but yet our population of African American youth is only 16%, and that is widespread across the country. So that is something that really needs to be addressed because it's carrying on through them for the rest of their lives. We did see a reduction by 22% less African Americans we reported missing that were youth compared to 2010. Again, not saying definitely that it's our program, but we're starting to see some connections. Domestic violence, we do the same for domestic violence. So we take Every time we go on a domestic call for service, we learn of their children in the home, and we collect the school and the grade, and that information is fed into our juvenile unit Huddle, and we create an action plan for them as well. And that action plan goes from contacting the school social worker all the way down to offering free counseling at our Family Resource Center, which is a police facility separate from our police building, for those children that have been exposed to domestic violence, because we know they're more likely to be domestic finders and commit crime later. Finally, with one of our last pieces, juveniles that do commit offenses, we do not want to send them to court, to the general criminal justice system. We try to avoid that whenever possible. So we send every arrest that we have through our juvenile unit Huddle system, and then we do the same thing. We create an action plan, and part of that action plan is our own 6-week program at night, where the parents have to come to 2 of the sessions with a licensed social worker, and we're trying to understand the dynamics of the home of why the child is committing an offense. And they go through that program, and it's really geared toward making them part of our community. And that's the GT Focus program. We've seen some great results there. 2008 to 2011, 30% of our first-time offending youth were being arrested again. And we've dropped that number down now to 5%. Those that go through our GT Focus program are only being arrested 5% of the time, as opposed before the program, 30% of the time. Issues of race again. So we've seen a 4% reduction in arrests with African Americans since we implemented our program. But we still account for 39% of our 2014 arrests were African-American youth. And my closing slide, we talked about that single gear we call suppression. And what we refer to as we want a 3-gear system where we have prevention and intervention. We don't want police departments being single gear. We want them to move forward with those other pieces. So thank you very much.